Funny enough, some of them have really respond to HDR, and the blacks are super black and things like that. So I guess producers like Mike have to think about that, don't they, as consumers watch more and more content?
Of course, people are watching a lot of content on the mobile phones, on the tablets, so studios, Warner and others, they have to take into account where consumers are watching that content. Many times outside of the home, long episode series, so it has to look good in the TV set and in the mobile devices.
Thank you very much indeed for both of you. Let's now go straight to the forum, shall we? Motion capture specialist, actor and director Andy Serkis is there.
Welcome back. Hello, IBC. How are we feeling? I said hello, IBC. It's a Sunday. Right. Have we all been here all week? No. Good. Newcomers. Is this anyone's first ever IBC? Right, this is a good show of hands because you're about to witness the fitness of a very, 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 very special keynote speech. Who was also the first IBC, so we are gonna have a special keynote from the one and only Andy Serkis. IBC virgin, again, like many of you, the IBC virgin. So what's gonna happen is this, ladies and gentlemen, we're all gonna sit and we're gonna watch in awe. But number one thing, please download the Slido app, because that is the only way you're going to be able to answer questions. We're not passing around a mic at any point in time. Welcome, latecomers. Sit down. Oh, I'm not going to do this. We need to crack on. So please download the Slido app. Get your questions in. They'll come in fast and furious. And I'd like to, without further ado, welcome our moderator, who's Caroline Jardina, who is the tech editor of The Hollywood Reporter, who's going to run the show and introduce Andy and give us a great keynote. So without further ado, thank you very much. Caroline, welcome. Not your first IBC, though. Not your first IBC. Welcome. Thank you.
Welcome. Gollum, King Kong, Caesar. These are characters that came to life thanks to the intersection of art and technology, but they stayed with us thanks to the emotive performance from this year's IBC International Honor for Excellence Award recipient and today's keynote speaker, the innovative and talented Andy Serkis. Andy has worked across film, television, and theater, gaining awards and critical acclaim for his numerous roles, including the BAFTA-nominated role Ian Dury in Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll, and iconic roles such as Gollum in The Lord of the Rings, Kong in King Kong, Caesar in The Planet of the Apes, and Supreme Leader Snoke in Star Wars The Last Jedi. In 2012, Andy co-founded the Imaginarium, a performance capture studio and production company dedicated to the art and craft of next-generation storytelling, where he's exploring the potential of technology such as virtual and augmented reality. In 2017, he made his motion picture directorial debut with the Imaginarium's first film, Breathe, and followed that with his next film, Mowgli. In a moment, Andy will join me on stage, but first let's take a look at one of his most iconic performances.
It is my hope that out of this solemn occasion, a better world will emerge out of the blood and carnage of the past. A world founded upon faith and understanding. A world dedicated to the wish for freedom, tolerance, and justice.
Please join me in welcoming Andy Serkis.
Woo!
Hi, everybody.
So, Andy, there are so many facets of your career that we want to talk about today. But to start, would you tell us a little about your early career, how you got into acting, and then what eventually led to your role as Gollum?
Sure. I'll try and encapsulate that in a very short, concise way. I'm known for rambling, so forgive me. So I started out life wanting to be a painter, a graphic designer, or work in the visual arts in some way. And I went away to college to study that at Lancaster University in the north of England. And in the first year, year, and I didn't even realize this, but you had to do a subsidiary course. And I thought I was just going to be working on the things I wanted to do, and I was very excited. It also happens to be near the Lake District in the north of England, where I was a passionate climber at the time. So that was also a good reason to go to that place. But there couldn't have been anything further from my mind than to end up in the acting profession. But in the first year, so as a subsidiary course, I ended up looking around for something to do, and I got involved with the theatre studies department. And I started designing sets and posters for their shows, and eventually started playing small roles. And then by the end of the first year, I was offered the lead role in a play called Gotcha, and went through this whole process of working using sort of Stanislavskian techniques of really embodying a character psychologically, physically, and emotionally. And at that point, I realized that I didn't want to spend the rest of my life behind a drawing board. I wanted, or an easel. I wanted to bring characters to life through acting. I made a telephone call to my parents, and there was the longest silence I've ever seen. It was bad enough going to art college, but to become an actor was just like the most heinous crime that could have been committed. But anyway, I went ahead with it. And it led to me working at a local theatre, getting my first job in what people would know as rep theatre in the UK, or stock theatre in the US. And I basically learned my craft very quickly. I did 14 plays back to back, playing during the evenings and rehearsing plays during the day. So a constant kind of access to building characters very quickly, right. and everything from Shakespeare to Brecht to modern playwrights to pantomime to just this whole kind of education of working in theatre. And with that, there was a director who really gave me a very strong start in terms of the philosophy of what performing, acting, storytelling, and community really was about. And it was a really significant moment for me because this director was very community orientated and really taught me that acting was not an activity which is about just self-expression, about the vanity of working out your own problems. You can go to therapy for that, but so it was very much about providing a service to community, and that I've always carried that with me, that acting is something for a force for change. I mean, a real force for change, and that has the potential to do that. Yeah. So years sort of went by, and I was working very much as a theatre actor, started the notion of writing my own material and making short films and so on and so forth, started working in film and television, worked on a lot of British independent movies, television programmes, and then in 1999, I had a call from my agent saying, Andy, they're making these films of Lord of the Rings down in New Zealand, and they'd like to audition you for a voice for a digital character. And I literally went, look, there must be a dozen decent roles in Lord of the Rings. Can you not get me up for something that's a proper acting role? I don't want to do a voice for a digital character. And they said, well, the character's Gollum. And I'd read The Hobbit when I was at school, and I hadn't at that point read Lord of the Rings. And I remembered that character very vividly from The Hobbit, and then started working on the character for this audition. But I'm never considered myself like a voice actor in any way. It was just, for me, building a character, voice was always a part of it. So the psychology of creating the role, the backstory, how, the why, how do you ground an abstract or kind of fantasy character in something that feels very truthful and human and real. So that, when I met Peter Jackson, so I did a first round of auditions, and I did this version of the voice, which was actually based on my cat throwing up fur balls. That was the origins of Gollum's voice. I was looking for something that would drive the body physically. I mean, Gollum's called Gollum because of the way he sounds, and I wanted something that would really affect his physicality coming through his voice, and where he carried his pain and guilt, was because he's killed his cousin. And so I was thinking, well, it's probably trapped in his throat. The voice is trapped in his throat, and how can I make that a physical, involuntary action? And then I literally watched my cat throw up a fur ball in front of me, and that whole kind of thing of when cats go, literally became, that's how that all kind of came about. So the casting director, who was then John Hubbard, was watching me do this and kind of going, what is this? What is this? Anyway, they sent the tapes off to Peter Jackson. Peter obviously kind of liked it, and then we met. And what I realized was this: I happened to step into a world that was changing. I happened to step into a world that was where visual effect was about to become linked to performance in a way that it probably hadn't been before. That up to that point, people on sets, the actors were imagining things that weren't there, and they weren't really affected by that opposing force because there was nothing to act with. And what Peter wanted was an actor on set to play that character. And even though finally he would be, because he was so emaciated and 3.5 foot tall and strange looking, unlike me, that it would finally be manifested as a CG character, but he wanted someone to play the role opposite the person who's going to be playing Frodo and Samwise Gamgee, because they needed to react very strongly and physically interact with the character. So I find myself in New Zealand, and on the beginning of what was a pretty extraordinary journey of, understanding the birth of performance or motion capture. It was called.
That was called.
Time.
That's right. Yes.
That was a long-winded answer, but anyway, that's how I got there.
Oh, fantastic. and then having gone through that process for Gollum and then followed by King Kong, you have described those as two epiphanies for you about what the potential of your craft is. Would you elaborate on that?
For sure, absolutely. I mean, when the first time I stood in a motion capture volume, and I was able to raise my right hand, and I'd played all the scenes out, by the way, on set, in real locations with Elijah Wood and Sean Astin. We had been up the side of mountains. My first day was scene 798, and it was on top of Mount Doom. It was just like the way filming goes. Your third film, last scene, major climax moment. Oh, it's the first day. So we're up there shooting that, and then I would have to go back and repeat the process in a motion capture stage for purely digital shots with Gollum. That didn't involve the other two actors, but they'd shot plates, and I was choreographing myself back into these plates. And the first time I stood in front of the screen and saw me kind of raise my hand and get into the physicality of Gollum, and seeing that as if in a magic mirror, and seeing Gollum appear as a 3D shaded model, and seeing the movements, and see my ability to, almost like a puppeteer and marionette at the same time, become this thing physically, was just so mind-blowing. And so it was a crystalline moment of everything, in a way, of all my forms of expression kind of coming together in one moment. So the artistic side of what I was setting out to do, mixed with acting, and this ability to totally inhabit something that is completely other, and so that then became that was one of the epiphany moments, which was seconded by, if you cut to the end of the whole Lord of the Rings period, which was we shot 3 films in over the course of a year and a half, principal photography, but every year we would do up to 5-6 months of reshoots as each film was coming out. So it was a kind of a 3.5-year process, really, shooting the first trilogy. And at the end, on the very kind of one of my last days shooting, and I remember it very clearly. It happened to be my birthday, and it was an Easter weekend. Peter Jackson invited me over to his house, and he said, "Andy, we'd like to talk to you about something." And I was like, "Oh gosh, okay." And there was me thinking, having finished Gollum, or about to finish Gollum, that I would be going back to my life as a conventional actor, working on screen, occasional theatre jobs, and but building up the idea. I was starting to want to direct at that point. He said, "Look, we would love you to." First of all, he gave me. It was my birthday. He gave me the ring from the Two Towers, which was amazing. And I was like, "Oh my God, this is incredible." And then he said, "And we would like you to play King Kong." And I was like, "What?" And he said, yeah, we really think that we'd like to use this technology to bring Kong to life, because we want to see the inner soul of Kong. We want to see how he reacts and behaves with Andaro. And I'm like, my mind is racing, thinking, this is the end of typecasting as we know it. This is, you know, 1 minute I've been playing this 3.5-foot ring junkie, and the next minute I'm playing a 25-foot gorilla who falls in love with a woman, and it's like, this is the best thing ever. You know, it really does mean that any actor can play anything, regardless of your shape, size, color of your skin, sex, whatever. You know, it's the most incredible 21st century tool for an actor, or 20th century tool for an actor at that point. Oh no, it was 21st century. Yeah, 21st century tool as an actor. So it was literally kind of from that sort of spawned this whole desire to push as further and further and further as I could with as many characters as I could.
And some of this actually helped lead you to forming the Imaginarium, didn't it? The inspiration.
100%, yeah. So whilst shooting Kong, or coming to the end of shooting Kong, which again was like a 1.5 year process, a year of principal photography, and then some months back on the motion capture stage, for instance, using clamshell, small kind of monitors, which I'd be able to then play emotional scenes with Naomi Watts' character, who we'd already kind of played those scenes out on set, but then to be able to get the real kind of interaction, I was able to get Peter Jackson's select of her shots and relive those scenes and actually have a very intimate kind of relationship in that way with Anne Darrow. As that was coming to an end, again I was thinking, right, I'm going to go back to my conventional life, I think.
It's not going to lie.
And I was immediately asked to direct some performance capture for a video game called Heavenly Sword, which the company Ninja Theory were building at that time, and they really wanted to push the boundaries in terms of storytelling and in terms of characters that are emotionally engaging within the video game world, because up until that point it had mainly been about either martial arts or hacking and slashing and killing, but the story was thin on the ground in those days. So I cast the game as if it were a film or a TV show, with great actors, and we started to rehearse, and we rehearsed it in exactly the same process as you would a play or a film, working on character, and then we ran the whole thing as a story, as you would, and it was a really incredible experience. And then when it came to shooting it, and this was in the UK, I realised there was actually nowhere to do it, because I'd only ever worked with Weta in New Zealand,
Sure.
and there was no performance capture. At this time, it's performance capture. So the change from motion capture to performance capture is really the addition of facial capture and capturing audio simultaneously. So it's not just literally physical motion, but the entirety of the performance being caught, which is why it's performance capture. No one was able to do that in the UK. So I had to fly everybody over to New Zealand to shoot this video game. And then I thought, this is nuts. Up in Cambridge, there are cameras being built. In Oxford, the software's being put together. And why are we having to travel across the world? So I wanted to create a sort of sandbox / laboratory for furthering the art and craft of performance capture, and then not only in the sort of the big budget film world, but also looking at it in terms of, well, how do you relate with other types of performers, dancers, how can it work for lower budget movies? How can you make this affordable? How can you streamline it so that it can actually be used without a massive back end of post production and rendering? So that started that was what was the
Right,
so my
right.
business partner Jonathan Cavendish, who was a very established film producer, and I got together, and we built a company that was creatively driven, where we were going to bring in writers, directors, filmmakers, to actually, on the fly, create digital characters that could, be changed with an actor in the room, exploring the potential of those characters. So we then worked on big budget movies like the Avengers: Age of Ultron and Godzilla, and we started to we kind of got a bit of a name for ourselves, making bespoke characters for bigger projects. What happened was the other side of the business was an IP business, which was all the films that we were wanting to make, and we started to develop Animal Farm. So, I mean, and we'll go on to that later, but that was one of our first things. We wanted to create a way of having human actors playing bipedal actors playing quadruped animals. So it was those kinds of questions that we were asking, and that was the initiation of the
Right. And then along the way, other things were happening in the business, like virtual reality came out, augmented reality came out, and you began using these processes for content in these areas, one of them being an early test for Magic Leap.
That's right.
Would you maybe introduce that, tell us a little bit about the Grinning Man project?
Sure. Well, we'd got to know Roni Abovitz on our journey at the Imaginarium, and he was such an inspiration, and I'd seen the very, very early iterations of their device, which was a huge kind of Heath Robinsonian kind of machine at that time. That it was like going to the optometrist. You put your chin on and you look through these sort of lenses, and you saw a virtual character in a real life environment, and it completely blew my mind. Again, I was like, wow, there's huge potential here for creating a mixture of theatre and CG characters, where you can actually bring these two worlds together, make the live cathartic experience with large audiences happen with digital characters as well as real actors on stage, for instance. So that had been sort of growing over the years, and then as the new device was the prototype device was about to launch, a kind of happy accident happened where I went to see a show called The Grinning Man in London's West End, where I was really taken with it, and I think we've got a video to kind of explain the process from here on in.
We
but
do.
That's the well, maybe we should watch that first. And,
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Okay, would you play the video, please? Thank you.
Prepare yourselves for a tale so utterly horrid and yet strangely uplifting. Here!
I was fortunate enough to go and see the penultimate performance of The Grinning Man at Trafalgar Studios. Everything about it, the subject matter, the fact that it was a play within a play within a play, the puppeteering, everything. I just started to get images of this show as a motion captured piece.
Gift of love has given me life, my sorrow and heartache you have melted.
The whole notion of capturing a theatrical production is brand new. This hasn't been done before.
This is the most advanced technology in terms of motion capture that exists. But there's a sense that if it all works, the product at the end will be something that no one's ever seen before.
The Imaginarium was born out of, I'd like to do Shakespeare's plays as video games, or to take theatre and take the performances that have been worked on by actors over a course of a rehearsal period, and then somehow, create a future life for them.
We think that what we're creating might enable an audience to wander around in the middle of a performance.
What we have here at the Imaginarium are people who are very attuned now to working with a lot of different creative forms of expression. Because what you're able to do in this world is not just like a particular take as you would in film. You're able to split up performances within that take.
My story ends here. Your story begins.
What's so incredible about this is that we have these performances now. They're in the bottle, if you like. They can be manifested in countless ways on countless platforms. Who knows, in 10, 20 years' time, someone else might come up with a different design for the characters. We can enlarge their heads, we can enlarge features, make their brows more hooded, make their noses bigger, design them in whatever way we choose to. It won't be too long in the future when you'll be able to buy the data and put your own designs on the character and bring it to life as a sort of as a show that you're creatively involved with as well.
So you said in that you said in that clip that Imaginarium was born out of wanting to do Shakespeare plays as video games. That's a pretty powerful concept, and you actually continued to take this technology even further, and you did a test that we're going to show next, but that one also includes a digital version of you.
Right. Right.
So would you explain that progression and introduce the next clip?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, so the result of that, what we captured was, I mean, theatre is very difficult to film and to have the same intensity, energy, and able to reach an audience. I mean, they do. Of course, you have things like Shakespeare Live, or National Theatre Live, where you can actually film the performances and beam them out over the country for people who aren't able to be in the room. But this is, theatre is so much about actors in 3D space, and to really get that experience of being involved with it's like Tom, the actual director of the show, was talking about being in and amongst and walking around and being able to choose your angle whilst the actual thing is going on. So what we created was a 5-minute section of that as a demo, which we could then watch on the Magic Leap device. And in the first instance, we created it as a piece of tabletop theatre. So we shrunk the actors down so that they could fit onto they could be this high. So we could then watch the whole play. Like in Star Wars, like the holograms. I mean, literally like that, and you can enjoy it in a particular way. But you can also move around or if you want, you can have dinner and have a load of people sitting around a table and literally have a dinner theatre experience. Then the same data, the same performances, the same capture can be used to take it into a different venue, a site-specific venue. Maybe you choose around the country, you choose to watch it in some, I don't know, some part of York where the stone buildings can play part of the set, and then you can watch those performances or the back streets of London down some dingy alleyway. You could actually build that into, so it is truly mixed reality. So that was the ambition for that. One of the things that and I really do believe that Magic Leap has an enormous future, and I'm sure that most of you all know exactly a lot about Magic Leap. But I think there will be a point in time where there is going to be a huge tip, and they will become a major player in terms of the delivery of content, which is why we're very passionate about having them as partners. We really want to help create content for them to prove it. So along with that, one of the big desires for me as a film director is the ability to take facial capture or to speed up the pipeline, if you like, the virtual production pipeline, so that, I mean, and everyone's chasing this in the film industry, so if any of you guys come up with something, please do come up with it quickly, because it's a really, really hot topic within the film industry. But it's real-time facial retargeting. So an actor playing a role that is unlike, say for instance, when we were making Mowgli, Christian Bale is playing Bagheera the Panther, and we captured his facial expressions. But of course, you have to wait for time to have that retargeted onto the digital model of the Panther's face, his performance, which was extraordinary. And so when you're doing a cut of the movie and you're showing it to the studio, you're having to use lots of things which don't tell the story, or you're having to use kind of cartoons or kind of overlays or very simple animation to try and convey a very complex performance. And you cannot get a really good read on it. So we worked very closely with, we also do work, the Imaginarium does work very closely with Unreal, of course, and but also with 3D Lateral. And I went out to Belgrade to work on a test, and for that we chose a piece of Shakespeare. And so what you're going to see now is basically a digital version of myself transformed into then a completely other character, just to show how and that was, to all intents and purposes, that was the fastest turnaround. They were able to show me this digital character, which is so unlike my own face, literally within hours of shooting, and transform me into a completely digital character. So this is the result of it.
Let's take a look.
Tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace. From day to day, to the last syllable of recorded time. And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out. Out! Brief candle! Life's but a walking shadow. A poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more.
That is a remarkable digital version of you, and what we're seeing now is now you can play a digital human as well with these capabilities, but that brings you a lot of new creative opportunities, but it also definitely raises a lot of issues, including ethical ones. So I'd love to get your thoughts on where this is headed.
No, sure. I mean, there are huge kind of workplace / kind of ethical / diversity issue. You know, I've always maintained, as I said at the beginning, you know, the greatest thing about this technology is that you can play anything. Any actor can play anything, regardless of who they are, regardless of sex, color, whatever. Obviously, we live in an age of diversity. And I remember having, I mean, and as you say, as we're getting closer to being able to, with films like The Irishman that's coming out, as we were talking about, right. You know, with Robert De Niro being able to play a younger version of himself using facial performance capture, you know, what are the ethical boundaries? And I had a discussion with Michael B. Jordan, who I was in the Black Panther with at the night of the SAG Awards this year, and I said, Michael, do you ever think that they're using performance capture technology? Do you think there's ever a moment in time where you, as a person of color, can play Abraham Lincoln, and that I, as a white, middle-class, white guy, can play Martin Luther King? Do you think that's ever possible using this technology? You know, that was the big debate. I mean, and it's just like the fact of the matter is, there is a world now where we can do that. You can have actors, you can have digital resurrection, you can have an actor playing someone who's long gone, as we did, you know, we saw with Peter Cushing. We can have, you know, I mean, it's interesting because the whole notion of like real people being played is very interesting, because you have an actor like Gary Oldman playing Winston Churchill using a huge amount of prosthetic makeup, and that is sort of seemingly all right. You know, it's okay. There's an understanding which goes back to years of, you know, it's makeup. It almost goes back to a theatrical tradition of artists, makeup artists working on an actor's face. But as soon as you start to go into the digital realm, if you could actually recreate an absolute, you know, photogrammetried image of and three-dimensional version of Winston Churchill and have an actor play him, you know. Right. So it brings up all sorts, and also you know, go back to the grinning man thing when I was talking about data and how in years to come performances can be manipulated, reused. And the way I think about that is you know, in terms of, say, music sampling. And if you take, you know, we're very, very familiar with great traditional, you know, or songs from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s being the basis for, you know, reworked beats added, you know, sampled fractions of elements of, you know, so that as a sort of concept we live with. You know, can you do that with an actor's performance? What's the you know, where does the IP authorship, you know, that kind of content ownership, where are the boundaries? So there are lots of issues surrounding it, but I think it is a very, very exciting time. And going back to the Martin Luther King, Abraham Lincoln thing, you know, I think perhaps now isn't the right time because diversity is hugely important, and it's having, you know, it's really making its mark within the cinema industry in terms of casting. You can see it right, you know, within 2 years since Black Panther. I think Black Panther was a big wake-up call to everybody. That you know, it's time to allow actors, whether they are disabled, there are many disabled actors there who haven't had a chance, they should be given a chance. And, the needle has to swing. But it can also open up, in the future, I think, disabled actors should be able to play able-bodied characters using performance capture. So it is a really interesting debate.
Mm-hmm. On the who owns your likeness? I mean, we've heard, Robin Williams, for example, it was reported that, he left instructions of how his likeness may or may not be used. Do you think this is something that, the Screen Actors Guild or individual actors will be talking about more?
I think so. I mean, it's going to, I think my face has been scanned 1,000 times.
Right. And once you have that blueprint, if you will.
Then anybody can put me in a very compromising position if they so wish. I can be anywhere, doing anything. But then so can we all probably. You don't even have to have performance capture for that matter. But I do think that there are going to have to be very strict, and I know Equity, British Actors Equity, and also SAG are wrangling with that as a who owns the. I'll give you an example. There was a performer in one of our Apes movies who truly believed that his performances were used in another movie, and he could see what he'd done. So. That is, there should be remuneration for that. There's just no question. That is a performance. Mm-hmm. And so, like with The Grinning Man, we were very careful about drawing up contracts with those actors as to what they would own and the potential to revisit their contract. Once the delivery was there, once the known quantity was there, their performance should be, for each. Whatever platform their performance ends up on, there should be another point of remuneration. So it is going to be a big debate, I think.
So let's talk about what's next on your plate. So your next project, you're directing Venom 2.
Indeed.
What can you tell us?
I can't tell you anything really, apart from. I can tell you that we start shooting in about 10 weeks' time. So I've come very late into the process. Normally, of course, you're developing a project for a long period of time. But I'm literally parachuting into this one, and there's a very, very short period of time to make a massive movie. So the pressure is definitely on. We're shooting at Leavesden Studios in London, and with an amazing cast, of course, led by Tom Hardy, who gave such an extraordinary performance in the first one.
Have you worked with him? You haven't worked with him.
We've never actually worked before, although we've been circling around each other for years, wanting to in some way, either as actors. We almost worked together as actors. I really admire, and we sort of have a respect for each other's work, and so that is very exciting, and of course a great cast with Michelle Williams and other people who will be coming into it, who I can't mention at this point, and. So we're literally very soon going to be up to our necks in it.
Okay, and then also further out, you are planning to do Animal Farm.
Yeah, it was interesting because we were well on our way to we're doing it with Netflix, and we were just about to go into a sort of a long prep on Animal Farm. So we'd started designing all the characters, we'd started working on how they would physically move, with set designs, set concepts and so on. We've got a great script finally after, these things take such a long time. We've been, again, that was one of the first things, as I was saying, at the Imaginarium. It's taken 8 years, at least eight years to get a decent script that we're really happy with. So that will sort of dovetail into the end of Venom.
Very exciting. Shall we answer some questions?
Absolutely.
Okay. So one of our guests asks, what is the most difficult emotion to effectively capture?
Wow. One of the most difficult emotions, I guess, is I guess it's it's very interesting when you're playing characters that are abstracted from yourself, because it's like a Venn diagram. You're always using parts of yourself, your own emotional recall. You're always using that to ground the character in a reality. Even with the Shakespeare piece there translated into that creature, it has to have a kind of semblance of real, truthful emotion. So it varies for me. you know, I've always found playing characters further away from me easier, and actually characters that are much closer to me more difficult. And so I think the less is more for me. The less is more version, which actually I really was challenged to do when I was playing Caesar in the latter films. You know, where it became personal, when it became about revenge and the sadness of losing his family. That stuff was you know, it really required a kind of deep kind of soul searching, and to actually trust that the inner will come out without doing anything kind of externally, and will that read?
Okay. Let's do another one. Actors rarely get to see dailies immediately. In the volume, you can have playback right away. As a director, do you show this to your performers?
That's really up to the actors if they want to see. I mean, in the motion capture studio, performance capture studio, sometimes it really helps to see blocking to help you, because you're not. There's two different ways of working in a volume. You can actually just run. You can run entire scenes. You don't have to stop, move the camera, shoot this beat. You can play out like a 5-minute scene as almost like a theatre piece. And then when the actors have done that, and you've reached a conclusion, and you think, yeah, that's it, that's the take. You know, the actors can then go and sit down. Then you can move in with the camera and start to put your angles. So I think in the early stages of shooting, the sort of the prep period where the actors are trying to calibrate their movements to the avatar that they're playing, that is when they can really look at the camera and see on screen. It's like a magic mirror, basically. It's like if you take a TV monitor and you flip it up the other way, then you're able to go, okay, well, I want to bring more of I want to make him more kind of hunched in the back of the neck, and then you can actually dial in positions so that the avatar character is actually dialed in a default position to have slightly more of a crooked neck. Or you can make it a slightly more asymmetrical and slightly lopsided shoulder, or whatever it is the character that you're playing. You have control over the puppet that you're playing, in a sense, so that you'll still be leaning into that as a physicality, but you might want to accentuate it a little bit more. So those sorts of, I think for the actor, that's the most useful thing when you're actually shooting a take. Because you're only seeing a non-facially captured, which is going back to my point about you're not seeing the facial capture. You're only seeing the physical representation. I think it doesn't really serve the actor to. I mean, you can look back at your performance and see, because what you do also when you're filming on the performance capture stages, as you saw, we look at a quad of the actual faces of the actors, and that's what you're really judging performance on. That's what you're looking into the actors' eyes and seeing if they're really getting it. And if it doesn't happen, if it doesn't, you can't kind of build that in. You can't augment the performance later on. It either happens emotionally there and then, or it doesn't, and then in which case you have to go for another take.
Mm-hmm. The ability, though, to see the final in real time, do you think that's on the horizon?
Well, I think, I do think with video game engine technology such as Unreal and Unity, and I do think it's perhaps not, well, it's not here now, but it will not be long before you will be able, the level of the rendering power that those engines do is so helpful for virtual production. You can move lighting around, as we all know. We can pick up props, move them about. We can very quickly block a scene. We can scout. We can look at we can block scenes and see actors in those spaces. What we don't have yet is a kind of, as I say, a real-time facial experience, and that I think is a little ways off, but not too far off, maybe a couple of years, unless anyone can be quicker. Out there's a challenge.
Okay, let's see what else we have here. When you become a character, you mentioned that you embody them physically and psychologically. How much of the character stays with you once you're finished?
That's a really good question. I actually don't believe you can ever go backwards. I think once you've played a character, you have brought something out of yourself that is accumulative. So I mean, and I have played some incredibly dark characters, and you do scare yourself as to the places that you allow yourself to go. And in fact, the whole notion of acting and psychopathy is really interesting, because although acting is all about empathy, you're an observer, and you pick up emotion, and you observe other people, and you read people constantly. I mean, it's something that you do all day long. It is a bit like being a therapist or a psychotherapist, where you're looking for tells, you're looking for you're reading people, gathering information. But the actual where am I going with this? What was your question?
Does the character stay with you?
Does the character stay with you? That's it. Yeah. I've been through so many sort of emotional journeys with characters, and I truly believe that. I'll give you an example. I did a Mike Leigh film where I was playing a futures broker, and when you get into a Mike Leigh film, you basically give your life up for the rehearsal period lasts about 6 months, during which time you delve completely into the character. You stop seeing your own friends. You only mix with. I was just with futures brokers for about 6 months. I learned to trade. I learned to hang out with them in very salubrious locations, and do things that only brokers can do, which is quite extraordinary, and listen to the music that my character would listen to. You just completely go down this rabbit hole of the character, and it takes, at the end of the process, it takes the decompression from something like that, the drawing yourself back. I don't think I've ever really. There will always be an element of that. I've seen that side now, and I can't go back. So you do kind of, I mean, when you're playing Kong and you're going home at the end of the day to your family to have dinner, I did find myself kind of leaning forward and kind of, on my knuckles at times. But that is true. I remember playing with my kids who were young at the time and getting up from a table kind of like that. It's like you do carry those things with you, but. Yeah, they never kind of truly go away.
I believe we are out of time, but let me wrap up by saying, everyone, please join us tonight for the IBC Awards, because there will be more with Andy as he accepts the International Award for Excellence. And please join me in thanking our guest, Andy Serkis.
Thanks, Kylie.
Thank you so much.
And Andy Serkis may well be joining us here at the IBC TV studios live in the next hour or so. Looking forward to that.